B2B sales today is management consulting. It's not even, I don't even think it's sales anymore. You're basically a management consultant. I'm not a huge fan of cold emailing in general.
Okay.
I think it's because I don't like being on the receiving end of it. But
Dan, I'm sorry. That's how this relationship started.
The best predictor, exactly as you say, Chris, of who succeeded in life insurance sales was not IQ or even experience, but was their explanatory style. And so, and the gist of it is that.
Well, tickle me pink. If it isn't the greatest guest I've arguably had on my channel ever, Daniel H. Pink, 7 times New York bestselling author of To Sell is Human, Drive, When, The Power of Regret, and many more. Dan, thanks so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.
To start out the conversation, I want to put your impact on the people in my life and just in general in this world in perspective through the lens of a customer story. Or shoot, I'm a sales guy. I'm so used to saying customer story. A story of my friend, Andy Gotelli. So Andy in 2013 started out at Red Hat, and he was in a cubicle, and he picked out his first sales book ever, To Sell is Human. That's your book. He didn't just read it, but he applied the principles. And then he moved on to Oracle. He moved on to Google Cloud. He closed what he describes as a smattering of 7-figure deals, 8-figure deals, and 9-figure deals. And I just spoke to him on the phone today, and I told him you were coming on. And he said, tell Dan, I'm going to make $2.3 million this year before tax, and probably 20 to 40 million in equity when Databricks goes public in the next couple of years.
Oh, wow.
That's the level of impact that your work has had. So Thank you so much. And how does it feel to make it that type of impact on people?
It's cool. It's cool. Listen, I'm a writer, and I work from this little office where you're seeing me today. I'm entirely by myself. And I throw stuff out into the world. And so to know that it has a modest impact is fantastic. So you might have kept me in the writing business for a few more weeks.
And so I asked Andy, what's your secret to success? And he said, of course, you read your book, but particularly the ABCs were a key part of his success. And we're not talking about the cliche, always be closing.
Right.
He said something quite erudite and intellectual, something profound: attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. Those are your ABCs.
Right.
So at a high level, could we start to walk through these different ABCs, starting with attunement?
Yeah, let me take a step back though, Chris, and explain why these ABCs. The argument that I have is twofold. One, everybody's in sales, no matter what they do. Certainly your friend Andy is in sales because he's in sales, but everybody else who's not in sales is also in sales. We're spending a huge part of our time persuading, influencing, convincing, controlling, et cetera, et cetera. Second thing is that we're now doing it in a landscape that has profoundly changed. It used to be a world of information asymmetry, where the sellers always had more information than the buyer. Now we're in a world of information parity, and that's a fundamentally different world. We've gone from a world where buyers had not much information, not many choices, no way to talk back, to a world where they have lots of information, lots of choices, and all kinds of ways to talk back, and all kinds of tools for discovery, for finding stuff out in ways that are just absolutely magical, beyond simply search engines to now AI. And so my argument is that we've gone from a world of buyer beware to a world of seller beware, where the sellers have to be on notice. And in that kind of world, if you look carefully at the academic evidence, the research on influence, persuasion, particularly in the sorts of these proxies for the sorts of domains that I'm talking about that are information parity, it turns out that always be closing is not a good idea. I mean, we can talk about that it's aggressive, that it's pushy, that it's not nice. That's fine. In a world of information asymmetry, where the sellers had more information, it's not a bad idea. In this realm, it's a terrible idea. And what the evidence says instead is that the 3 things that matter most are attunement, which is, can you get out of your own head and see things from someone else's perspective? Can you take another's point of view? It's fundamentally important. When you lack coercive power, you have to be able to find common ground with the person whom you're trying to persuade. Second, buoyancy. As you know, as your friend Andy knows, as probably 98% of the listeners know, if you're in sales of any kind, you're going to get rejected a lot. And a lot of people don't deal very well with rejection. So buoyancy is, how do you stay afloat in this ocean of rejection? There's some things that we can do, but adapting that kind of buoyant attitude in being in this sea of rejection and refusal is really useful. And then finally, there's clarity. Clarity has two dimensions. It used to be that in sales, if you had access to information, you had an edge. But now everybody has access to information. So what matters more, especially since there's this massive welter of information out there, is your ability to curate information, make sense of information, synthesize information, find the truth in information, separate the signal from the noise in information. So instead of accessing, it's curating. And then, this is actually very intriguing, and again, I think that AI is only going to accelerate this, is that you have to go from merely problem solving to problem finding. That if your customer or prospect knows exactly what their issue is, what their problem is, in B2C sales, they don't need you at all, essentially. In B2B sales, they need you to be one of two or three bidders to drive down the price. But what's often happens is that the seller, your prospect, doesn't know what its problem is, or they're wrong about their problem. And so the premium has shifted from problem solving to problem finding. So that, in the long-winded encapsulation of sorts, is what the ABCs are, but also why these ABCs are necessary at this moment.
Well, thank you for taking a step back to put the why in context behind the ABCs. And I can't wait to dig into these a little more. It might be in the section on attunement, you call out some myths, like high IQ people go outside of sales. You need to be coin operated. Myths like that. Can we start to dispel these myths for the audience?
Where do you want to start, man? We got all kinds of them.
Yeah. So the first one is that like high IQ people go outside of sales.
Yeah, that's BS right now. Especially if you look at something like, let's take B2B sales. B2B sales today, again, in a world of information parity, all right? If you're selling a computer system or consulting services or a payroll service or whatever, if you were doing that 30 years ago, it was very difficult for prospects, to find out, aside from pretty kludgy word of mouth, and remember, without email or anything like that, it's pretty difficult for your prospects to find stuff out about what is a payroll service, or what is a computer integrator, systems integrator, or what are some of these B2B things. Hard for them to find it out, hard for them to compare prices, hard for them to compare quality. That's not true anymore. Like they're coming to the sales process in way later in the game, having done a lot of their own investigation, a lot of their own research, information parity. And so this is simply a way of teeing up the idea that B2B sales today is management consulting. It's not even, I don't even think it's sales anymore. You're basically a management consultant. You have to go into a company and understand its business inside and out, understand its current needs inside and out, anticipate its future needs inside and out, understand the market that it's in, understand the strategic imperatives of that company. B2B sales is management consulting today. It is not this transactional thing that it was 20 years ago. And so, we tend to think that, it could be wrong, that high IQ people go into management consulting, but the idea that that sales today is not intellectually sophisticated is complete bullshit. Forgive my language, but that's the way
we speak French on here, Dan. And
okay.
I think of Steve, my first field seller at Oracle, when I was an entry-level sales development rep. And he became a mentor, and he showed me his W-2, and he made over $1 million. So it's cool, the upside of sales if you're good at it. And he was like a McKinsey consultant. In fact, he read McKinsey all the time, and he told me to read McKinsey. So to your point of being really a management consultant, he got on calls with executives, and just the insight he offered, he knew their business almost better than they did.
Bingo.
And Dan, another thing that I discovered to be true, and it's one of your myths, is that you don't have to be coin operated. I remember at Oracle, Patsio, I'd call him, said you need to be more money motivated. And honestly, personally, I'm very meaning motivated. But what's your thoughts on distill this myth for us that you have to be coin operated?
It depends. I don't think you necessarily need to do that to be in sales. I think one of the things that you see in the research is that high stakes commissions, high stakes rewards are very effective in the short term. But they don't necessarily fuel people to develop in a career. They don't necessarily fuel people to develop a new set of skills. It forces some very short-term thinking, and in many cases, it offers a way to it encourages people to take the low road. We see that in all kinds of things. Like the most glaring example, one of the most glaring examples in the last few years is Wells Fargo, where people were literally committing fraud to sign up new clients in response to these very heavy-handed carrots and sticks. And so now I'm not against variable comp at all, but again, we don't pay management consultants with a low base salary and then keep them, or a no base, a minimal, a thin blanket base salary, and the rest of their comp is is variable in commissions. That's not how we pay management consultants. And if B2B sellers are operating like management consultants, I don't think we should pay them that way either. I'm a big believer in hiring great people, paying healthy base salaries, and offering satisfying good variable comp based on simple measures that matter.
The final myth to blow up is that some people have sales skills and others don't, right? I would love your thoughts on this one.
Well, I mean, I think that there are some things that people are natively better at than other people, but I think that this is the kind of thing that everybody can learn how to do. In the same way that, it's a form of literacy. It's a form of business literacy. We never say, oh no, nobody, only a few rarefied people can understand accountants, what it means to be, understand accounting principles. Oh, only a rarefied group of people can understand marketing principles or finance principles or anything like that. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be great at it, but a lot of people can be really good at it. And I'll give you a corollary myth on that, an offshoot of that, which is the belief that to succeed in sales, that you have to be a strong extrovert. And what the evidence tells us is that's flatly wrong, that strong extroverts do not make better salespeople. It's wrong. It is, in your parlance, a myth. What we see is also that strong introverts aren't any better. The people who are better are the people in the middle, what are called ambiverts, people who are somewhat introverted, somewhat extroverted. And so the idea that to succeed in sales, you have to wrap things up a little bit, or to encapsulate it a bit, that you have to be a coin-operated, backslapping, not very smart, super extrovert to be in sales is just not. I mean, maybe that was the case 40 years ago, but it ain't the case today, especially in B2B.
So you've been in the moving business for a long time, and we're not talking about moving boxes, but tell us what this means when you describe the moving business. It just really resonates with me and a lot of people.
Well, I'm glad that phrasing works for you. I'm not sure it worked for all that many other people, and it's the idea that we're all, no matter what we're doing, we're all in the business of moving others. We're like, even if we're not in sales, if we're working in an organization, we're spending a lot of our time trying to move other people to do something or to stop doing something. So you're trying to get someone to be on your team rather than on another team. You're a boss trying to convince your employees to do something different or do something in a different way. You're an employee trying to convince your boss to do something different or do something in a different way. And so all of us are in the business of trying to move others, and we want to do it ethically and effectively. And there are ways, and we know we have some pretty good evidence and pretty good strategies and pretty good tactics for how to do that.
So your study found that, was it 40% of activities for almost any job was related to this, like moving or non-sales?
Yeah. I mean, we did a big survey where we asked a very large sample of full-time workers in the US and Canada question about how much of your day do you spend, I remember the exact language, but persuading, convincing people to give up something they value for something you can offer, where we're essentially describing sales without using the S word. And we found that people are spending about 40% of their time in this activity. That's a lot. I mean, 40%, let's say you work an 8-hour day. That's over 3 hours a day, every day of the week, every week of the year. That's an enormous amount. It's an enormous amount of time. And what we saw, even though the mean was 40, we saw this distribution that had some people down in the teens, but a lot of people up in the 60s, 70s, 80% of their time in this thing that's like selling, even though they don't have selling in their job title or on their business card.
Could you tell us a little bit about the E-test? I think this falls under the category of attunement, and correct me if I'm wrong, but
right. This is a technique that social psychologists use to measure this quality of attunement, which is taking other people's perspective. And essentially, what they do is they bring people into a laboratory setting. They it varies based on what they're trying to measure, but the crux of the exercise is that they give people an erasable marker, and they say, draw a capital E on your forehead. And there are two different ways that you can draw the E. You can draw the E. I could draw the E so that it's facing you, or I could draw the E so that it's facing me. Now, there's no right answer to this, but what it is a test of your instinct, your default setting, your muscle, like what's your move, what's your first move? Do you take your own perspective, or you take others' perspective? And what it shows is that in different conditions, we are better or worse at taking another's perspective. And so, but again, this idea of perspective taking, which is understanding someone else's point of view, understanding their interests, understanding where they're coming from. It's beyond empathy. It's not only understanding what they feel, it's also understanding what they think, how and where they're situated. It ends up being a fundamentally important part of any kind of sales, persuasion, or influence.
And so the test is there's no right or wrong, but would you say like one, if you write the E a certain way, is it more of an indication that you're better at perspective taking or more empathetic, or?
Yeah, maybe. I think the bigger issue is that how manipulable it is. So that when you put people in positions where they feel powerful, so you give people exercises where they say, I want you to think about or write about, even better, a time when you exerted power over somebody, or a time when you didn't have power. What it shows is that in general, the more powerful you feel, the worse you are at perspective taking. There's essentially an inverse correlation between feelings of power and perspective taking. And that is, I think, a hugely important insight into all of us. And that what you look at just in generally just perspective taking and just broader notions of status. So that high status people tend to be not very good perspective takers. Low status people are better at it. And the reason for that is that low status people don't have power. They don't have control. Someone else has control of the resources. So you better understand where they're coming from. And so one of the reasons that people who are in the moving business, who aren't in sales, who are trying to persuade others in a non-sales setting, particularly bosses, one reason they go awry, one reason their car runs over the edge of the road is that they're not very good at taking other people's perspective. They feel powerful, and as a consequence, their perspective taking abilities degrade. And alongside their degradation of their perspective taking abilities is the degradation of their persuasive abilities. And so one of the things that's really important is in sales, yes, but also just in other kinds of persuasive efforts, is to be wary of feeling powerful. Because feeling powerful can make you a worse persuader.
Yeah, it's like Icarus flying too close to the sun. And I've noticed in my life, when I felt most powerful and prideful, I've gotten in my own way. So I just think of I took a lot of notes. I even re-listened to your book before this, but like increase your power by reducing it. So that's essentially playing into the theme.
Yeah, you increase your ability to persuade by reducing your feelings of power, which is very counterintuitive. I think it's very counterintuitive for people, Chris, but it'd be the kind of thing where, if I were trying to persuade you, and let's say that I was your boss, and I was trying to persuade you to do something different or do something in a different way, and you didn't think it was a great idea, you were somehow resistant to it. In the face of that resistance, I'd be more likely to assert my power. Saying, what are you talking about? Why are you not doing this? Like, I'm your boss. Do what I freaking say to do. And so you end up dialing up your power. What I should be doing in those kinds of situations is dialing down my power. is approaching the conversation in the face of resistance, saying, okay, so, Chris is very good. In order for me to achieve what I need to achieve as a boss, I need Chris to be all in. Maybe at some broader level, Chris needs us less than we need him. Chris is powerful in a way. So I just dialed down my feelings of power in the moment, just in that moment. And in general, again, we have this inverse relationship. I dial down my feelings of power. That tends to dial up the acuity of my perspective taking. And so I might be able to see things from your point of view. Why are you resisting this thing? Maybe you're right. Maybe there is an obstacle in your way, and I'm the boss. I can knock it out of your way. And so it's a counterintuitive thing that when you're persuading down, and forgive me for asserting the truth that we live in hierarchies, when you're persuading down, that in many cases, reducing your feelings to power can increase your persuasiveness.
Well, tell us about strategic mimicry.
Well, I mean, one of the things that is, again, you opened up by talking about myths of sales.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the things that when you look at the evidence on sales and persuasion and influence, we come into this realm with certain beliefs that are fashioned from hearsay, from folklore, essentially. And some of them are not true, like the idea that strong extroverts are better at sales. That's not true. We've also been given guidance over the years that what you should do to be more effective in sales is mimic the other side, to mirror their gestures, mirror their posture, that kind of thing. And it seems kind of slimy. It seems kind of duplicitous, but it's a good idea. Because what it tells us is that the research tells us that human beings are natural mimickers. That in some level, our ability to take another's perspective is not purely kind of cerebral, not purely cognitive, but is embodied in a way that when we assume the other person's literal physical stance or repeat their gestures, we actually have greater access to what their perspective is. And if you look at, and human beings, if you just look at people talking in the wild, they are natural mimickers. We mimic people all the time. And so doing that, being conscious of that and doing it a little bit more is extremely effective. And what the research tells us is that when people who are instructed to mimic, they get better deals. They're more persuasive. And there's also a check also in these studies asking the other side, did you feel that you were being mimicked? And they don't invariably say, no, not at all, not at all. And so let me give you one piece of tactical advice, particularly for your B2B people, which is the one realm where this is really useful is in technical sales, because technical sales folks love their own specialized jargon. And in many cases, the people who they're calling on aren't necessarily experts in that specialized jargon, those specialized words. So you're using words and phrases that might not land with them. But a remedy for that is to repeat back the customer's language, even if it's technically imperfect. And so repeating people's words back to them is profoundly effective. There's some interesting research in waiters and waitresses, where waiters and waitresses who repeated back a customer's order had higher tips, significantly higher tips than waiters and waitresses who didn't, even though both the accuracy of orders was exactly the same, whether you repeated back or not, because the people felt heard.
Yeah, I mean, this is so good, such gold, and we're only 23 minutes and 25 seconds in. But back when I was selling at Google Cloud, I did win awards for my prospecting abilities to break into what we call green fields. They're on AWS or Azure on the competition. Some of them were even meeting with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, the week before. And I actually mirrored their language. I'd never met them, but like looking at their LinkedIn profile and how they talked about their role. And so would you say it also applies to things like cold emailing? Because it seems to have
100%. 100%. I'm not a huge fan of cold emailing in general.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's partly because I don't like being on the receiving end of it. But
Dan, I'm sorry. That's how this relationship started.
if there is, but if there's value in it, inherent value in it, I think it's better. But that said, I do think that you can mimic on email. You can do strategically mimic on email. For instance, if you get, let's say you get something inbound, and it addresses you by, not, I mean you, Chris, but just the folks out there. So let's say that you get an inbound of some kind, and it addresses you as, Ms. Fernandez, and you get another one that addresses you as Dear Jane. You're better off responding to the first one with Dear Mr. Harris, whoever was emailing you, sort of using that more formal language, and then in the other one that used more informal language, Dear Bob. So you can mirror in that way too. You can mirror tonality, you can mirror formality, you can mirror actually exact language, and it works in digital realm. It also works face to face, or not in digital. It works asynchronously digitally, and it works synchronously, either over voice or video.
So right now, we're in little boxes, right? We're virtual, and I can see, I could mimic a little, not that I want to overdo it. But if we were in person, wouldn't it be even more powerful if we were at like a lunch and say you were executive that in a B2B sales role? And would you say like the mimicry is even more powerful in person?
I think so. And here's the thing. I wouldn't over-index on the mimicry, because I think that people who are, I think this is why I call it strategic. You want to be conscious of it.
Yeah.
You actually want to be in the moment, notice how the person is moving and behaving, and how they're gesturing and how they're sitting, and maybe mimic a little bit of that. But the thing is that that just simply being aware of that is going to make you more attuned. And when you're more attuned, you're going to mimic naturally. So I wouldn't over-index on that. I would really focus on understanding what their issues are, understanding what their interests are, understanding what problems they have that they think they have, understanding what problems they might have that they don't realize. And in the course of doing that, particularly with the language, some strategic mimicry can help out a lot, and help you find common ground with the people whom you're trying to persuade.
And so that right there's a great insight. Mimicry is something you should do, but don't overanalyze and overdo it. Now, going back to the situation.
And most people don't. The truth of the matter is that most people don't. If anything, if there's a sin here at all, it's that people don't do enough of it.
Okay.
Because most of us, most of us will feel so weird going overboard on that we won't do it. And what happens a lot of times in the research, where they instruct participants to mimic someone else in some kind of encounter, is that they go back and ask the people, did you feel like you were being mimicked? The other side of the table, do you feel like we were being mimicked? And invariably they say no, because it's such a natural part of who we are. I just want people to be slightly more conscious of it and slightly more strategic about it.
Yeah. So if we go back to the hypothetical example, you're an executive and I'm meeting you for the first time. You agreed to a meeting and we're getting lunch. Based on your book, I might start the conversation with the best question you could ask, or one of them, which is like, Dan, where are you from?
Yeah, I think that's a good. I think that's a good question. I mean, Jim Collins thinks that's a good question. I think it gives you an insight into people. So, do they say where they live now, where they grew up? You often will hear a story that gets you into it. I think one of the things that comes out a lot in some of the research, you see this in just a whole variety of different realms. I didn't write about it that much, in part because some of the research came out after the book was out, but. People are this is just a general principle. It has nothing to do with sales at all. Is that people are much more willing to have deep conversations than we think, and that you can move toward deeper, not so much shallow talk, but deeper talk faster than we think, without being weird about it. So you can say, like if I say to you, Chris, where do you live right now? Where do you live right now?
Yeah, I'm over on the east side in Austin.
Okay, so another thing you could say there is also like, what's the best part of living on the east side of Austin, right? That kind of thing. Those kind. What's the best part of living there? Well, What are you most excited about in your job right now? Those kinds of things that actually are open-ended, but also questions that are actually, a little bit personal, but personal in the service of getting to know somebody a little bit better.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, a lot of the evidence shows, I wrote a little bit about this. A lot of the evidence shows that that people are that in terms of just conversations with strangers, people are much more willing to talk to strangers than we think. They enjoy it a lot more. Both sides of it enjoy it a lot more. It's a famous study by Nick Epley at Chicago, where he asked people to go on a commuter train in Chicago, and their job was to strike up conversations with strangers. And they had to predict beforehand how awkward and terrible is it going to be for you? How much are the other side going to hate it? And it turned out, I'm oversimplifying, that for the people who were instructed to begin these conversations with strangers, it wasn't that awkward. It's kind of interesting. And the people who were on the receiving end were like, "Oh, it's fine. It was cool. Yeah, I'm glad talking to him." So our projections, our forecast about these kinds of conversations are often off.
Yeah, it's helpful to understand the types of questions that get people to open up rather than shut down. And I love how you ask questions that got me probably feeling good too. Like, what do you love about?
Yeah. And
So
it's not manipulative, because it is genuinely interesting. I mean, like I am curious, like, what is the best part of living on the east side of Austin, or the best part of living in Austin in general? What are you most excited about now?
I could answer that. It's just the people, man, that you meet. It's unpredictable, open-minded, entrepreneurial. There's a gym with an ice bath by me, and just so much going on. So you got to come visit. I'm sure you do make your way to Austin, like
every
here
once
and
in
there.
a while. Sure.
Cool. So Dan, I noticed a Wheaties box. I think you're on it. This isn't a prepared question, but is that you on a Wheaties box back there?
It is only because
What's the story?
I did a little work for General Mills, and they gave that to me as a very lovely present.
Gosh, that is so cool. Talk about goals to get on a Wheaties box.
right there, ladies and gentlemen.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So let's talk about buoyancy. I mean, this is a cool one. And we're going to talk about, what Bob the Builder can teach us about buoyancy. Can we fix it?
Yes,
and so,
yeah.
Dan, can you remind us, because you highlighted in the beginning, but what is buoyancy again? And then let's talk about Bob the Builder.
Well, buoyancy is a term that I got, or sort of derived from somebody who I interviewed for this book, Sell is Human, who was a guy who was selling brushes door to door in the business district of New York City. Tough job. And he said that every day he faces an ocean of rejection. That's his phrase, not mine. It's lovely. And so buoyancy is, how do you stay afloat in that ocean of rejection? And so there are various things that we can do on that, about how we explain our failures. There are a few things that we can do on self-talk, where turning our self-talk into a question rather than into a statement might have a marginal effect. Some of the research that has come out subsequently shows that the effect might not be as strong as people originally thought, but I still think that it's a fairly useful exercise. So let's say you're going into a big sales call, and you're waiting outside in the lobby. You're in person. You wait outside in the lobby, and typically people talk to themselves all the time. In fact, there's a disorder. The name of it is escaping me, where it's actually, some people lack the ability to talk to themselves internally, and it actually really screws up their life. Yeah. Wow. And so it's some kind of miswiring, and so they actually cannot generate self-talk, and it ends up being a big liability, because we talk to ourselves a lot. Not always for good, but always. Yeah. And so let's say you're sitting outside, you're about to make a sales call, and your self-talk might be to pump yourself up, to say, you've got this, you're going to crush it, and so forth. And what the research tells us is that can be effective, that kind of positive affirmative self-talk can be better than doing nothing. But what some research tells us, again, the effect isn't as strong as I originally thought. What some research tells us is that kind of pump up self-talk is less effective than a quieter form of pumping up, which is the question, which is, instead of like saying, can you do this? You're outside. Can you do this? And rather than saying to yourself, you can do it, you got this, asking yourself, can you do this? And the thing about that, and we see this in other research about questions, is that questions by their very nature elicit an active response. Your wheels have to turn a little bit, whether you're asking a question to somebody else or you're asking a question to yourself. So if I say to myself, can you do it? You begin to say, yeah, I can do this. And you begin to recite, well, because I'm very well prepared and I need to make these 3 points. Yeah, I can do this because I dealt with a prospect just like this last week and I made the sale. And so this form of questioning in the form of this form of self-talk putting it in the form of a question can be actually a better performance enhancer than simply pumping yourself up. And that's where Bob the Builder came in, because Bob the Builder is not he doesn't sort of say, we got this, we're gonna, we're animals, we're beasts here. He's saying, can we fix it? And then his colleagues think about it, what they're doing, and they say, yeah, we can fix it. Yeah, so it elicits a more active response. It's pretty interesting phenomenon. I tend to do that all the time. There's some other adjacent research in sports psychology showing that elite athletes are more likely to do this than amateur athletes.
Talk about a hack that someone can use going into a peak moment, like a sales call, giving a speech, just maybe asking out the love of their life. It is so useful and practical. So what about under the category of buoyancy, positive explanatory style, or I think you described it as optimism with its eyes open, which was just a beautiful way to describe it.
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the best pieces of research in the buoyancy, which is this idea that, and this is very, very long ago research now. It's not probably almost 40 years old, from Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, who studied actually life insurance salespeople. And he found the best predictor, exactly as you say, Chris, of who succeeded in life insurance sales was not IQ or even experience, but was their explanatory style. And so, and the gist of it is that, I think for all of the talk we have in businesses, oh, you got to fail. Failure is part of the thing. It's like, you don't succeed if you don't fail. People don't do a very good job of dealing with failure and setbacks on their own. And so one of the things that happens is we end up beating ourselves up. And so Seligman came up with an explanatory style that involves what he calls the 3 Ps, which is personal, pervasive, and permanent. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. And so personal is when let's say I did the questioning self-talk, but I didn't get the deal. And I'm really distraught because of that. I can say, oh, it's all your fault. Mean to myself. Yeah. And the truth that I'm making it totally personal. Now you need to be clear-headed about being able to be doing better next time and so forth. But in general, most of these things are not entirely your fault. It's very rarely entirely your fault if someone doesn't buy. It could be that they have a sister-in-law who is a vendor or whatever it is, And so, is this personal? And so look for ways to explain that it's not personal. It's not entirely your fault. A lot of the times we also say, because it feels bad, because rejection feels bad, because failure feels bad. It gets into our bloodstream. We say to ourselves, this always happens. It's pervasive. And you have to rebut that. You have to say, is it really pervasive? Well, it's not, because I just made a sale 2 days ago. And then again, we end up, failure and setbacks really bug us. I don't want to be glib about that. And I think that one reason we're uncomfortable talking about it is that we pay lip service to failure, saying, oh, you got to fail. But we put people in situations where they're not allowed to fail. And we never give them the tools, the means to make sense of that failure, to contextualize that failure, to respond to that failure. And so as a consequence, we often will catastrophize failure and say, it's going to ruin everything. That's permanent. And so you have to rebut that. So when you're, one of the best things for buoyancy is to ask yourself, is this personal? And it's usually not. Is this pervasive? It's usually not. Is this permanent? It's usually not. And when you have that explanatory style, you say, it's not personal. It's like you don't make every sale, and they might have had other things going on in their life. Is this permanent? I mean, is this pervasive? No, because I made a sale last week, and I made a sale the week before that. It's not pervasive. And is it permanent? It's going to ruin it? No, nothing's going to ruin everything. And so that using the 3 Ps to rebut the catastrophizing, asking yourself again, is this personal? Is this permanent? Is this pervasive? Can be really, really useful in staying afloat in that ocean of rejection.
So we talked about attuning ourselves to the customer, being buoyant, and wanted to round out the ABCs with clarity. And earlier you alluded to becoming a problem finder, and that's different than being a problem solver.
Yeah.
So could you highlight the distinction between the two?
Yeah. I mean, I think that in sales, especially B2B, there is a benefit in. I mean, there's a book called The Challenger Sale. There's a methodology called The Challenger Sale, which I actually like. But I'm sort of drawing from the same, general lake that they're drawing from.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to be said for challenging your prospect, particularly on the idea that your prospect says to you, "I have this particular problem. This is my problem. Can you solve it?" And I think you need to push back and try to figure out whether that really is their problem, because a lot of times people are wrong about their problem or they don't know about your problem. So one of the big things in B2B sales, especially, is I like challenger sale. I mean, I'm using challenging in the more general sense. Is challenging whether the problem they think they're having is actually the problem they have. Also, using your expertise to analyze the problem, sharing with them insights from other customers and prospects that might help them do their business better, and getting to the heart of their problem. They could be that they think they have a systems integration problem when they actually have a personnel problem, or it could be that they think they have a systems integration problem, but they actually have a hardware problem. And if you can come in and surface those and address those, you're golden. I mean, one of the best ways to maintain allegiance is to solve problems people don't realize they're having.
Yeah. And you talk about different frames to curate information. Would love some thoughts on some of those frames and how they're useful in curating information when it comes to.
There are all kinds of things. I mean, these are super interesting. I think one of the things at a personal level, which I think is a pretty strong finding and is really, really powerful, is like, let's talk about selling yourself. We tend to think that there's some interesting research showing that emphasizing potential could be more effective than emphasizing past performance, which is counterintuitive. We want to say, well, on this, and it's not like it's an either or, but if you say at this job I increase revenue by this much, at this job I increase revenue by that much, that's good. All right, I'm not down on that at all. But there's some research showing that when you emphasize potential and it's a little bit hazier, people will fill it in sometimes with more optimistic projections than you would be comfortable giving yourself. So emphasizing potential in past and potential in selling yourself. So reframing around, so the potential frame is an important one. Another one that I really like, and it's really interesting research, is this idea about blemishes. So we have an offering, and let's say that it is, like many of our offerings, it's not perfect, or it's not perfect for every customer or prospect. And let's say that it's very good, but it has one downside. There's some very interesting research, about whether should you reveal the blemish or try to avoid the blemish. And my instinct had always been to avoid the blemish. And there's some other research from Stanford showing that when you reveal a small blemish at the end of a long list of positives. So this study used the sale of hiking boots online, where they gave one group of people hiking boots, a set of hiking boots, and a long list of positive attributes about the hiking boots. It was endorsed by this magazine. It had these kinds of indestructible laces. It had waterproof soles, blah, 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 blah. They gave in the second group the same long list of positives, but at the end was a small negative, but unfortunately they only come in two styles, right? So you have two conditions. One is a long list of positives. One is a long list of positives followed by the strong negative, but long list of positives followed by the small negative. And it turned out that people in the second group bought more hiking boots. And I think our instinct is that it went to the credibility of the seller. And that might be true, but the more powerful force was simply that the blemish put a frame around the positive attributes that in a way, and this is the work of Bob Cialdini more than almost anybody on the planet, showing what he calls the contrast principle.
Yeah.
Is that when people make decisions, they don't make decisions in absolute terms, they make it in relative terms. So all of us we're taught that the most important question in sales is whiff 'em. What's in it for me? When in fact, the most important question in sales is whiff 'em is important. Believe me, it's the second most important question. The most important question is compared to what? You need to actually have a point of comparison. And so what happened in this study was that when you had the small blemish at the end of the long list of positives, it almost paradoxically shined a light on that long list of positives. People said, oh, it only comes in 2 styles. Well, compared to this long list of positives, nothing. And so it operated as I like to look at it like almost like a flashlight, like the compared to what question.
Yes.
The small blemish triggers a compared to what question. That compared to what question shines a beam of light on all of those positive attributes in a way that those positive attributes are not as fully illuminated when they're simply listed on their own. And so I think that's another really, really, really important frame. Again, it has to be a small negative, a small blemish, but there's an argument for revealing a small blemish on a strong offering rather than doing what I've done in the past, which is hold my breath and hope that it doesn't come up.
So you mentioned the Challenger sale, and I had Matt Dixon on the podcast in the past, but I did say in the beginning, I have Dan Pink, the greatest guest I've ever had. And I feel like, was I labeling right there? Is that the label frame? Because it's risen to the expectation, Dan.
Well, I mean, maybe you're trying to persuade me. I mean, there is a labeling frame. I mean, there's a famous study of, there's a famous study in, this is again in this is probably like 50 years ago now, in the Chicago schools, if I'm not mistaken, where they randomly assigned the students, and they told in an elementary school class, and they told one group of teachers that these students were, gifted, high potential students, and the other one they just didn't say anything about, even though they were all exactly the same. There was pure random assortment, and the kids who were labeled as high potential actually achieved more than the kids who were not labeled high potential. So how we label something, there's other research. There's a famous kind of technique where you put people into a setting and you give them some money, a laboratory setting, experimental setting, and then under different conditions, you ask how much they want to share with somebody else. So let's say that let's say that you are in another room, and I am in you and I are in separate rooms, and in each round I have $10, and I can share with it as much or as little as I want with you. And let's say that also the rule is that if you consent to what I'm giving you, we both get the money. But if you say no, nobody gets anything. So let's say that I get $10 and I say, okay, I'm going to share $3. I'm going to share $5 with you, Chris. Will you take that?
Yeah. I mean, it's coming from Dan Pink.
Yeah, no, but you don't know who it is. I mean, seriously. I mean, you're just like somebody else. Somebody's been given $10 and their job. And here's the rule. It's like they can share with you any amount that they want. But if you say yes, everybody gets their share of the money. But if you say no, nobody gets anything. So if I so I could say I have $10, I'll give you $5. Most people would accept the $5.
Yeah.
Right. But let's say that I have 10 and I say I'm going to share 1 with you. You might say, no, I'm not taking that.
Yeah.
And even though that's a stupid decision, because 1 is more than 0.
Yeah, good point.
What I mean? So anyway, so it has all kinds of dimensions on this kind of thing. The point of it all is that point of this tortured explanation is the thing is, it's like purely rational economic terms, you should take anything that I offer you because it's more than 0. And so, but people, I wouldn't want to do that because we're not purely rational calculators of our self-interest, that we're tuned to certain kinds of fairness norms, and we're willing to enforce fairness norms even when it's against our economic self-interest. All of which is to say is that what you call this game changes people's performance, particularly on my part of the role. So, so if you call this the Wall Street game, people in my role share less. If you call it even with the exact same rules, if you call it the community game, people share more. Even it's the exact same thing, the exact same set of rules. What you call it can shape people's behavior. So what the frame you put around it, the label you put on it, can have an influence on people's expectations, on their belief system, and on their subsequent behavior.
Talk about a great punchline. Labeling is powerful. So I know we have limited time and you got to get running in a bit. So I'm going to try and squeeze out a few more questions. But
yeah, lay it on me. I'll give you shorter answers.
Yeah. How much time do we have, honestly, Dan? Because it's
6 minutes.
Okay, 6 minutes.
I got a 4 o'clock, and then and
this is sales, right?
You have by the time I log up, by the time I close this, find the link for the next one. Yeah.
100%. It's like with an executive, you got to manage the time. So, okay. So what's the purpose of pitches, and walk me through a few of the predecessors to the,
okay. Yeah. So this is a good question. So it's, again, one of the things I like about writing this book is the discovering of how wrong I'd been doing things for a very long time. So let's talk about pitching. You're pitching an idea for whatever, you're pitching a proposal, you're pitching something. I tended to think that the most effective pitch is you uncork this elaborate pitch. You have this kind of complicated song and dance, and at the end of the song and dance, you say "ta-da," and the other person whips out a checkbook and writes you a check. That's not how it goes. The most effective pitches, according to some very, very interesting research from Stanford and UC Davis, is that the most effective pitches are pitches that invite collaboration. So that basically that enlists the person to whom you're pitching as a co-creator in what you're doing. So you're not, the purpose of a pitch is not to immediately get assent. The purpose of a pitch is to enlist the other side as a partner in co-creation. Those pitches end up being more successful, and it changed the way that I pitch. I'm not trying to just, it's not a little show. It's a conversation. It's a conversation. It's an invitation, even more than a conversation. It's an invitation to collaborate.
Getting on the same side of the table to solve problems together. That is a great pitch on the best type of pitch. So I got to give a shout out to Kim Brown. You didn't just impact Andy Gotelli, who's making crazy money and going to retire early to be with his family. And you've just had a huge impact on him. But Kim Brown's a VP of business development that uses your ABCs to hire. And she said, Chris, asked Dan about his book Drive and how people should think about landing their dream job, what they should look for. And aren't there like 3 things you boil down in the book that describe like the ideal job?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what that book says is that certain kinds of rewards, particularly controlling contingent rewards, what I call if-then rewards, as in if you do this, then you get that. Those are fairly effective for simple tasks with short time horizons. They're less effective for complex tasks with longer time horizons. And the jobs that are most satisfying, where people do their best work, are jobs where they are not always chasing that contingent reward, not always chasing that if-then reward, but instead are paid well, are paid fairly. That's very important. Paid well and paid fairly. And then also have some autonomy, which is having control over what you do, where you do it, how you do it, when you do it. The move toward remote work is largely about autonomy. A sense of mastery, which is, are you getting better at something that matters? Are you making progress in meaningful work? And then finally, purpose is, do you know why you're doing what you're doing? Is what can you see what you do day to day making a difference in the world, or just making a contribution to somebody else? And when jobs, work environments have those attributes, people tend to be happier and more productive, more creative, and just do their jobs a lot better.
Final question. Any other secrets to sustaining long-term motivation in life?
Long-term motivation in life. Long-term, like work motivation.
It could be career motivation.
It's gonna vary to somebody else. There's an interesting new line of research about how what we really want out of life. One of the things we want out of life is a sense of psychological richness. So we want some variety. We want novelty. So pursuing variety and novelty is a way to sustain long-term commitment, long-term motivation. Certainly in terms of our overall happiness and well-being, that is being connected to others, being part of a community, having people in your life who you love and who love you is going to enhance your long-term conviction. Having a sense of purpose, that is having a sense of meaning in your life, really just more deeply knowing like why you're doing what you're doing, and feeling like what you're doing matters. Those all are pretty essential as well.
Dan, thank you so much for your time and generously sharing with our audience. And to the audience, to your success in tech sales and in life, happy selling and happy living. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, Dan.
A pleasure.